Welcome to another episode of Spotlight Podcast. We have a special privilege to film this episode from Warwick University. Today we will speak about AI in education, and my today's guests, Dr. Isabel Fischer, the lead of AI in education, sort of a project at Warwick University, and Ari Seligmann from Monash University from Australia. Welcome to Spotlight Podcast.
Thank you.
Welcome for having us.
Can you please briefly tell me how you end up in this field of AI in education?
It first started trying to run a master's seminar on AI and architecture, my primary background, and we were trying to understand the new technologies and their implications for practice and for design processes. And I learned a lot of lessons from that I shared with colleagues, and fell down the rabbit hole into continuing to think through the issues of AI in education and the implications for teaching and for learning, and also for the way we design assessments.
What about you, Dr. Isabel?
So initially I was involved in AI for impact investing, for ESG investing, and some of my earlier research is in that field. And then I changed and thought, actually, how can I use AI for the good of students? And I developed a formative feedback tool, which was AI-based.
We will talk about this.
Exactly, we're talking about it, but it's the start to really AI in education. And because I led that work, I was then asked to lead the institutional response to generative AI when it did happen last year.
So basically, to be completely honest, I came to Warwick University as an initiative from my own, doing a paper in my own studies at NTU. I came across your study that was developed by Warwick University, and you were the lead of study. And let's just explain to our audience that basically today Warwick University represents a type of university in the UK that really kind of embrace AI in education. Can you tell us a little bit more about this initiative?
Well, I don't think that at University of Warwick, I want to position as the only one in the UK embracing AI, and I wouldn't even go as far. As every university has their own approaches.
Sure.
And then because we are at Warwick in a devolved system, where actually each department and within each lecturer or professor decides on how much they want to embrace AI. So I let the opportunities for colleagues to get involved in AI, but they don't have to get involved. So we have a three-pronged approach. Each lecturer can decide on whether they want to encourage their students to actually use AI, whether they want to just authorize the use of AI, or whether they want to prohibit AI. And that is each lecturer's decision. And so my role at the time was to come up with the institutional approach to this three-pronged approach, as well as developing material and reports and studies that help those lecturers that want to embrace AI. And that's the report you came across.
What about the Monash University?
Yes, I have a similar kind of remit, let's say, right now, trying to stimulate conversation across all of the 10 different faculties about what the role of AI is in our education systems. And everybody is in a different place in the trajectory, from early adopters to being quite reticent about things. And we have a lot of different kinds of assessments and a lot of different kinds of teaching across the diversity of the university. So we're working with each group to think through where you design AI in, where you might design AI out, and how we navigate this round of emerging technologies and transformations of higher education.
Can you tell me at the moment, the Faculty of Architecture, how often do you students use AI, and as well as the lecturers for the formative and summative assignments?
Yes, so I'm also the Associate Dean Education for the Art, Design, and Architecture faculty. Within our faculty, probably the design department is leading the use of AI, and they're most impacted. And we're now starting with the very first semester, the first design studio, the first assignment in the first design studio is an AI-based image generator using those technologies. So in the design department now from day one, it's starting to be integrated, and we're working to see how it scaffolds through and how it works. The architecture department and fine art departments have different perspectives on things and different ways of integrating them, but there are pockets of people who are leading the way and innovating with different approaches to integration of different kinds of tools and different ways of thinking. So for ideation side, it promises to be a really interesting tool.
So is it too early to speak about any kind of a feedback from students or from the lecturers in relation to the use of AI in education?
It varies quite a bit. In our context, we just started the new school year at the end of February. So we're in week 4 of the semester and the rollout. So to that extent, it's a little bit too soon to know how everything is going. But the trajectory over last year, it's kind of like a tumbleweed going through the desert. It's building up momentum, it's building up size, and we're learning various lessons from each other as we go. And the student response is, from my experiences last semester, is, let's say, cautiously engaging with things. And we ran a setup with the Masters of Design group where we had them developing ways of explaining generative AI, and the first assignment was to engage with AI to do something. And then they were allowed to build on that for the second assignment, and only about 20% continued with the AI as a kind of temperature check of how students are approaching that, or one example of what I was directly engaged with. I think it's growing, but because the university tone is started out as more restrictive than permissive and is slowly becoming more permissive, the students are slowly becoming more comfortable that it's okay to use things. And again, it's a building of momentum.
How long does it take you to come from the point A to the point B?
It depends how receptive the people that you're working with. Building on the experiences we learned from Warwick, we developed a learning circle on AI in November of last year. We have about 50 staff from around the whole university, and they've been developing resources to help colleagues. And so that's another building of momentum. So we have 50 people who can tell 2 other people, then we get to 200 people. So we're slowly growing in engagement and involvement and the conversations that we have to have around this.
Dr. Fischer, I do remember going through your study thoroughly, and I remember that right about when we have the announcement about the ChatGPT 3.5, you were able to monitor your students' use of such tools from the University of Warwick. Can you tell me anything about the usage of these type of tools in your department?
Okay,
your opinion.
So first, let's step back. The first thing is about, I would like to respond to the point about how academics and students take up AI. So I have academic research, so we have to differentiate between my institutional work and my personal research. The research is on behalf of the University of Warwick as well, but it's slightly different. So as part of my research, my educational research, we find there's a tension. There's a tension for educators to be seen on the one hand as experts in their field, and on the other as facilitator of learning jointly with students a new technology, such as AI. On the other hand, students, they are also used to just sit and listen to the experts talk. And now AI and other emerging technologies push them towards more expansionist view of trying to actually experiment with something which we haven't done for many years already. And those tensions, to resolve them, that's the area of work which is quite difficult. And not every department or educator needs to use AI, because there are some areas where actually AI might not be that helpful. Exactly. And so I don't want to convey that everybody has to use AI, but those that find it useful for their students to deploy AI, they then have the materials through my institutional work to do so. And the uptake as such, or is the one you're referring to, is in a study we did where students were encouraged to use AI, and I then monitored how they engaged with AI, if they used AI to generate content, if they used AI to refine and to improve, and what we perhaps call augment rather than automate their input.
Can we differentiate for our listeners and viewers?
Automation is all about replacing. You get anything done by AI instead of the human. Augmenting is about working together to actually have a better output than initially it would have been on its own without AI. And so we are trying to see how students engaged with it, and we also provided them the opportunity to engage in the bespoke formative feedback tool I developed. And we found that only actually 10% of students use it to actually think critically. So they use AI not yet to their full potential, because they use it to generate ideas, to improve on ideas, but actually to really start to think critically. And that is the next step where we haven't seen that much of an improvement, because students are reticent about the use, and we discussed it here before, is that actually if you're not sure if you're really allowed to use AI, then do you want to spend a lot of time using it? It's this dilemma, and you might have found it in your own studies, is it really allowed? How much, I want to bring in my own thinking rather than AI's thinking.
Exactly.
And where is the point where I can still honestly say it's my thinking rather than AI thinking? And this is where...
Or it's my piece of work.
It's my piece of work, exactly. So this is where there's some unknown, which is not just, of course, in education, but also for other work, like consultants, for example. If they are consulting their clients, how much is it their own input? How much did they include AI? So it's not just students' concern, but it's one of the concerns students have.
Can you tell me just briefly a little bit more about this collaborative engagement between the University of Warwick and Monash University, and how we end up in this situation? What's the chief aim of the...
So any university is very international, or most universities, especially research active universities such as Warwick and Monash, pride themselves about their international networks. And our strategic alliance is with Monash, and so we collaborate on many projects, not just the two of us, but many of us. So it's about having reusing material, learning from each other, having joint meetings, joint initiatives, and our collaboration is one of those we do as part of the strategic alliance.
So through the Monash Warwick Alliance, which has been in place for many years now, provides opportunity for these exchanges and collaborations, building across. And so this is just one manifestation of an exchange program. And I'm here for about a week, and then Isabel will be in Melbourne in a few months, similarly for a week, as part of this particular exchange. Meeting with AI, having discussions about AI in the Warwick context, and then we'll have similar conversations in the Monash context in a few weeks or months.
Professor Holmes, somewhere in 2018, voiced his concern that we don't have anything concrete in the field of AI for education in terms of framework, in terms of ethics policies and so on. Can you tell me, in your opinion, in these 5 years, 6 years so far, have we developed from this point?
I suspect most people weren't thinking very much about AI until December 2022, when ChatGPT release of 3.0, 3.5 at that time made the splash and all of the things that it did. I think since then many of the universities and Monash in particular, and I think Warwick similarly, are adopting a responsible use approach, which is it's okay to use the tools, but we need to use them responsibly. Now, what does that mean? Responsibly means understanding that there are data and privacy issues with tools, that there are bias issues with tools, that there are how is the model made, is it explainable, how the tool got to be where it is. And so we're building up a consciousness about those aspects, as well as trying to further develop literally everybody's critical capacities to evaluate the outcomes of the tools. Obviously, we live in a world of fake news and the ability to make images of any sort and videos of any sorts that we want. So the quote-unquote hallucinations of the early AIs making the early large learning models.
Exactly. LLMs
making up information, and the ability to find that and judge that and figure out how to use that. So the responsible use is grounded in ethical principles.
That's why we have this juxtaposition of ethics and AI in relation to the educational sector.
I think so, but it's manifesting in trying to develop a notion of responsibility that goes with developing, good citizenship and integrity, academic integrity. And so many universities are now turning towards developing what we might call AI literacy programs, which help ensure that these issues of data privacy and ethics and bias are front and center in the decision making and the use and the selection of which tools you choose to use and various things like that. So there isn't yet a set convention as well. I think that's the important thing to note in this early transition. We imagine when Wikipedia first came out or Google search first came out, the universities had to adapt to new ways of engaging with information and new pedigrees of who's generating the information. And this is a similar kind of transformation where we're now trying to figure out, well, what's the etiquette of citing a Google search? What's the etiquette of using Wikipedia? We're at the position, what's the etiquette of using AI and generative AI tools? We know how to cite source material that historically has been developed and use Chicago style or Harvard. Or APA style. We have those conventions, and we're now trying to figure out, well, what are the conventions for selecting tools, for using tools, and for acknowledging and explaining the tools that we've used in the production of assessments.
And their limitations.
Well, in that process, you develop the critical capacity to evaluate them also includes understanding what they can and can't do and which one can do various things. I mean, often people criticize ChatGPT and other large learning models for not being able to do maths very well. But that's kind of unfair because they're not designed to do maths. So they're designed to do other things. And often when I explain, because there's a notion of narrow AIs and general AIs. So narrow AI, like AlphaGo, can play Go really well.
Exactly.
But it can't play solitaire with you, because it doesn't know those things. So we have to recognize the limitations of not just the way the tool was conceived of, but the limits of what we can and can't do with them.
Dr. Fischer, you wanted to add something?
Absolutely, because I just wanted to come back to an earlier point. It's not just about education. AI ethics is important for AI generally. And there are frameworks, in EU develops framework, the UK. So we have to adhere to those, and we have to look at those frameworks also in education. But education is the AI as such is the same AI ethics.
Do you feel that there is a lagging effect? Because we do realize that Dr. Floredy from Oxford is, with his team, leading the way in various departments, but education is somehow, because we also have this playing with words. We have education for AI and AI for education. Education for AI is we are producing the workforce, which we do, but then again, how much the AI can bring to education and how we are utilizing these tools, that's the question.
But the idea here is the deployment, which is then chosen because we are, as universities, pride ourselves of robustness. So we are very robust in our approach, and that's why we are lagging, what you call lagging behind, is because we want to make sure that what we use is absolutely safe for our students. So an example would be that we wouldn't use tools where we don't know where student data is kept.
Exactly.
So we have the ethical deployment should go that much as we try to achieve some university goals, such as at Warwick we want to have a very inclusive university. So for us the deployment of AI is important to make sure that every student can benefit from it equally, or that it even can level the playing field between different students.
And sectors.
And sectors, yeah.
In our context, we're trying to find the balance between learning with AI and learning about AI, because they're not necessarily the same things, and also maintaining a balance between cultivating people to be able to think for themselves, but also cultivating them to be able to think and work productively with AIs, knowing that in industries across the sectors, increasingly there will be some form of assistance going forward. I mean, if we think about everyone using Google to navigate to get from point A to point B, we're already collaborating with AIs in various ways. We may not conceptualize it in that way, but now I think one of the other lags is that the universities don't typically think about the tools that they use in the production in many disciplines. You know, if you're in a chemistry lab, you're a science experiment, you may be more sensitive to the particular tools you're using to do that experiment. But if you're writing a paper in a humanities class, nobody asks you which word processor did you use, nor do they generally care. But now we have to care more about which tools are being used and how they're being used in the processes.
Of course, let's be completely honest, even the 3.5 can do a lot of things in relation to the humanities studies and various assignments that today's students face.
Yes.
One thing we are quite keen as well is that we don't make sure that we don't recommend one AI tool over another. So we make sure that actually students are aware of the wide spread of tools, and that we only encourage students to use free tools. Free in the sense of not monetary exchanges. Of course, some of them you release data which we're not that pleased about, but it's how it is. But we make sure that we don't focus just on ChatGPT, but we also propose Gemini and Claude and alternatives.
Speaking about leveling playing fields, so these type of tools would be accessible even in these eventual phases to everyone.
The way the Microsoft and Google promotional materials suggest that they're slowly integrating large learning model capacity into their daily tools, which will become the daily tools that most businesses and universities are using. You know, even Gemini in Chrome is available now, yeah. And you imagine Apple and Safari will come, you know, forward soon. So we're in a particular transition moment where things are new, but they won't take very long to become naturalized in our daily lives. Again, the Google Maps. Nobody is carrying a map in their back pocket anymore.
Exactly.
And nobody is worried about the academic integrity of having a car navigator navigate you from point A to point B. So there will still be integrity issues to make sure that humans know things and have demonstrate that they've learned things through a good assessment design. But the use of tools to make our lives more efficient is going to continue without limit.
So, Dr. Seligmann, could you please give us a little explanation about the so-called early adopters of the AI in education and the centrally governed universities and the rest, let's say?
Sure. I mean, just by analogy, if we think about the early adopters as the first people who went out and bought the iPhone 1.
Yeah, back in 2007.
In 2007. It's important to recognize that iPhones have not been around for that long, and then they come a really long way in 15 iterations.
Exactly.
And we might imagine that AI will progress in similar kinds of ways. across the range of things that we do. But essentially the early adopters are the people who want to try new things and test them out and share what they found with others, and it builds the momentum of, hey, look what my smartphone can do. Oh, web, now, show your friends, this is the new apps that come out, and the momentum builds as people adopt technologies and integrate them into their lives. So even though ChatGPT, let's say DALL-E 2 and the image generators released about summertime 2022. Yeah. By the end of the year, we had ChatGPT. By now, we have Sora and videos. But even those are beta tested, and you have early adopters, and then you build up momentum. So many universities are at the point where they have pockets of early adopters within them. And in some cases, the university itself decides they want to be an early adopter. There's some examples in America. So for example, the University of Florida was a very early adopter. Even pre-COVID, they reoriented the whole university to AI. Arizona State University would be considered an early adopter. They were the first university in America to sign up with OpenAI to give enterprise access to their entire student body. So every university is going at their different pace. They have some that are early adopter institutionally. They have a lot that have early adopters spread throughout the whole institution. And one of the roles that I have, and I think Isabel's work here similarly, is to build the conversations amongst the early adopters and build the momentum towards thinking about the productive and responsible ways that we can integrate AI into our educational practices in a variety of different ways. But we're at the early adopter stage, like iPhone 1 or iPhone 2.
Dr. Isabel, would you add something?
Absolutely. So within universities, they are the early adopters, and we want to reach the early majority stage so that more colleagues actually embrace it. But then also, of course, we want to encourage other universities to collaborate with us. At the learning circuits, we do open learning circles. As part of the Warwick Learning Circle, we have external institutions involved as well. So any other institution that wants to get involved with our work and want to learn from us, they are welcome to look at our resources and join our learning circles and debate with us and discuss it. And it's always good because to reach the stage from early adopters to early majority, we need to understand the barriers. We need to understand the barriers of adoption or for adoption, both by students and by staff, and nuanced by department or by subject really, because there will be different barriers. But we want to make sure there's a dialogue. So this week we had a discussion within the business school, and we had an open discussion what people see as the barriers to adoption, and those who are the early adopters then discussed why they think what their approach is valuable and still achieves academic integrity. Because at the heart of concerns is the belief of academic integrity, that we want to make sure that by the time students leave the university, they have learned and are able to show certain capabilities and skills, and not just being able to incorporate AI in their work.
My kind of question now is, how does creativity fit into this context?
Well, AI offers an opportunity, on the one hand, to be perhaps less creative, and on the other hand, to be more creative.
To boost the creativity
exactly.
itself.
So before we had people who were creative by naturally creative, they like creativity, let's say look at the arts, and now AI comes in and offers people who were perhaps less, let's call them artistic, to consider different forms to the spoken word. So as part of my assessments, for example, I encourage students to use images, to use more visual material, and to be more creative in the choices of assignment titles, as well as the different types of material they use to produce their final assignment or artifact, however you'd call the output.
Dr. Seligmann, what about Monash University in relation to the creativity and the AI in education?
Coming from a design disciplines, have probably a slightly different take on creativity. We are using AI in the faculty for ideation, coming up with ideas and stimulating ideas, because AI is very quick. I want to design a shoe. Give me 25 versions of a shoe to get ideas.
And
of
then
what kind
A/B
of
testing.
shoe. And then you can work through them, which in some ways is not dissimilar from trolling the internet looking for shoes or going through a magazine and looking for shoes. It's now just a faster system to get more ideas. Give me 10 paper topics. Give me 10 titles for my paper.
Exactly.
So the optioneering is one thing, but what we're finding, and a year on, it's quite interesting in the image generation space. DALL-E 2, for example, and related GPT-based things, you put in a prompt, you get some 4 images, you pick which image you want, you can regenerate the prompt and you go through the process. There are increasingly things like Leonardo AI and its real-time canvas where you can prompt and draw at the same time, so you're engaging in the image production.
In the creativity process.
In the process, and there are other versions of that. So there's quickly a shift to not just text to image, but text to image plus engagement in crafting things. And that's where creativity gets amplified even faster, because you can start with people that are thinking various ideas and it can help visualize them. On the other hand, it's also democratizing creativity to a certain extent, or democratizing access in general, because someone who couldn't make an image can now quickly make an image of anything.
To initiate the idea of creativity.
Well, to initiate the idea, to test ideas, to expand, as Isabel was saying, to expand the medium that you might use to communicate ideas or to explore ideas through. So, for example, if you, again, I'm using analogies that broaden the conversation, but most people don't make websites using HTML programming anymore.
Of course.
We use graphic interfaces that then the HTML code come behind it.
Of course.
So now we don't have to make apps anymore because we can say what we want, and the back end of the coding and the programming can be done by an AI or be done through a graphical interface. So in the language of AI, and a colleague yesterday reminded me of this, they talk about AI as layers of abstraction, computers as layers of abstraction. And so you used to have to use HTML, and now you put a layer of abstraction of a graphic interface on top of it, and you no longer have to interact with the HTML. So basically we
bypass the part of the coding, which was technical part.
You bypass the technical part through the layer of abstraction, next layer of abstraction above it. And so you don't have to make an image now, you can do text to image. So we're just increasing the layers of abstraction, which increase the access and what the range of people that can do things with these tools.
But we might afterwards go towards the same ideas. This is where the increase of creativity at the individual's perceived increase of creativity, but at the same time, we are influenced to actually go into a certain way, where we all merge into the similar type of ideas, where people actually critique that there's more convergence rather than divergence.
In our email exchange, it was quite a few up to this point, you always emphasizing the AI tools that are not Gen AI.
Absolutely. So I'm always making sure with students before generative AI and even now is that AI is much broader than generative AI, and that students should explore more different aspects of AI rather than just considering ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. There are different AI tools that are not generative AI that also can help students and staff, because we are also looking, there's this. Both sides need support, and administration and professional services as well. But let's just look at students on the one hand and educators on the other. We need to support both. And to support both, there are various AI tools available, going to be even developed further, that are not just generative AI based. So it's not about generating, but it's also improving. And I'm not sure if this is now the moment to talk about the formative feedback tool.
Of course it is, because eventually I would come to the subject, but please, you already introduced it.
So when I have an industry background, and when I joined higher education, I asked students, what do you perceive as the greatest obstacle to academic and employment success? And I analyzed the results, and one thing that came up is academic writing. And through qualitative research, so asking students more probing questions.
Interviews, focus groups.
In various focus groups at my previous university and at Warwick, I found that actually many students found they were disadvantaged because other people have people that can help them on rereading, on proofreading their assignment. So a big issue at the time was that actually they feel that they don't have support while others have support. Of course, universities do provide support. You can have one-to-one tuition on academic writing, but you have to book it in advance.
Of course.
You book it, let's say, in February, and your assignment deadline is in May, and so in February you don't have the same
because
needs.
Usually staff are overloaded with work.
Exactly, so you have to...
Let's be completely clear.
Exactly, so you cannot have it tailored, but we need it on demand, so the day before the deadline, or the evening before the deadline, when students' learning is the largest because they really want to finish their assignment, that's where we need to provide them formative feedback on their writing so that they can still enhance. So at that point, at Warwick, we developed a formative feedback tool that is available to students. So students submit an assignment and they can get feedback. And the feedback is in different forms. There's the written word, but there are also some nice images and figures to explain. One thing, for example, is a knowledge graph. So imagine you have written a 10,000 word dissertation, you submit it, and then there's this drawing of what you have just written in form of a concept map, mind map, we call it knowledge graph, that combines the different concepts that you have written about, so you can review how the logic behind your arguments. And other aspects are such as comparing different skill sets. How good is your grammar versus your organization of the assignment? How large is your introduction versus your conclusion? How good are the references that you use? Do you use, you might think as a student, any reference is the same standard, but in reality, our journals are ranked, so high quality articles are in different journals to others. So students suddenly hear, actually, this is a very good paper you use in your assignment. Maybe, if this is part of your main argument, you might want to actually emphasize this paper more. Or alternatively, maybe this paper, is perhaps the journal is not that well known. Perhaps reconsider.
How long have you trained the formative feedback tool, and what would we like to say? How long did you feed the entire?
So it's not just about trains. It's AI involved as well. So it's not just giving. There are some examples that are, let's say, sentence length. It's not about training it. It's just counting words. It's easy things like this. You have a sentence that is 68 words long, and you might say, actually, you might want to consider having it shorter. Others, you use existing algorithms to bring it in and to provide the output.
And the output is real time, what we need to...
output, but one thing I have to say is, of course, it only depends of students filling in ethics approval forms.
Of course.
Because we want to make sure that students are aware that the feedback is AI generated and that we haven't got any liability that actually AI says, look, this looks like a really well-written assignment, but in reality, the marker afterwards doesn't think so, because the topic idea might be completely off topic. Whereas AI would have said, well written, well done. And the topic as such is not the right one. And so we have a lot of disclaimers, and I only work with, if it's the module leader wants students to have this, and only if students then submit an ethics form to confirm that they are aware that it's AI-based.
Dr. Seligmann.
I think it's a really important distinction we have to make now between AI tools and Gen AI tools, or rather not make the distinction, but to clarify that they're different kinds of things. And again, it goes back to the narrow AI and the general AI. There are different kinds of AI. There are different kinds of algorithms that do different things. So most people carrying a smartphone, if they have some kind of game on it, it's the AI is the computer you're playing the game with. And so, as Isabel describes her tool, there are some things that are programmed in, and then there's some that follow the algorithms and check for the number of words, and so you can program AIs. And then we also now have the large learning models and the GPT-based image generators, which we think of are now called generative AI. But they all sit within a family of AI tools, which is also part of the confusion now, because lots of things we're using in our daily life, like Google searches and Google Maps and the games we play on our phone, and half the apps in our phone are AI. They're just not using large learning models or chatbot interfaces yet. They may soon, but they're not yet. So which part is Gen AI and which part is not Gen AI is almost a moot point. That's not so interesting. But if we think about AI as various forms of assisting tools with varying degrees of intelligence that can give us feedback and information, help us make decisions or do tasks, it just becomes one big family.
Now, of course, it's one of the family of many. It's not just AI. We're looking at emerging technologies, and we're looking at other forms. And at Warwick, for example, we have an esports center. And the reason I mention esports is because it's actually quite novel to actually, we are quite proud of our esports center. And I use it with in my teaching to start to think about the metaverse and to think about other aspects, especially AI, ethical aspects within other form of technologies, because esports and metaverse bring other concerns that we haven't addressed really as a society, and that I encourage students to approach while we go and look at our esports center and play games and do assignments linked to esports.
How much have you used the augmented and virtual reality, especially in your department, that could be heavily dependent on these kind of tools today?
Its use is increasing. I think the best example that I've been recently engaged with is during the COVID period when students were isolated and unable to make it to campus. We built a virtual model of our facilities, and then I think we were using Mozilla at that point, and then inviting people to interact in the facilities that they couldn't actually come to.
In the virtual classrooms.
In the virtual classrooms, but we weren't using them for teaching, we were using them for social purposes and for exchange and discussion around work, with an idea that then when you were eventually able to come to campus, it would feel like you had been there all along, and the transition would be easier. So those are an example of, and we trialed several different of these virtual platforms to create those. It's like a Second Life version of our facilities. Within our explorations, some of the studios focus on that. There's some really interesting industrial design tools where you put on VR glasses and you can draw together in 3 dimensions. So it's definitely a evolving space, both augmented reality and virtual reality. But again, that's another set of emerging technologies that have lots of implications to think through for the implications for education. And we're somewhat distracted by generative AI now, but need probably to think more broadly across the range of emerging technologies.
Across the spectrum.
Across a broader spectrum.
Okay, for the very end, could you kind of give me an overall picture? How do you perceive the way forward?
I think the secrets to our success are going to be being transparent about the tools we use and how we use them, feeling comfortable to share. How did you make that cake? How did you make that video? How did you do X or Y? And then sharing those things, but also being able to explain the process of how we do things. How did I bake this cake? How did I put this bicycle together? How did I write this paper? Because if we're able to be clear and open and have a dialogue about not just what we've done, but how we've done it and what we've learned through it, then all of these technologies can just fold into that paradigm and fold into supporting that way of working. And it's not that we are always, so secretive and it's a secret which word processor I use to write my essay, but we're not in a culture fully of disclosing and explaining the tools that we use to do our academic assessments. In other parts of our lives, in the kitchen, we don't mind sharing so much. But in academia, I think we need to broaden the sharing, and that will help us move forward with this transition of technologies and others, because we have a culture that they can fit into. Along those lines, and this may be a gross generalization, but I often think that my medical colleagues are in a much better position to make these kinds of transitions because they have new tools, they have new techniques, they have new machines, they have new drugs, they have new procedures that come out all of the time. So they have an orientation to integrating and trialing new things once they're tried and true and tested and in the literature that supports why you might use one technique or one drug or whatever. The whole university doesn't operate with that same kind of attitude, but we need more of that attitude to help us with these kinds of transitions and with the future pace of evolution of these things.
Dr. Isabel.
So if I wanted to point to one aspect, I think we need to have build more spaces for actually experimenting with different forms of emerging technologies. And that includes the opportunity for staff to experiment in low stakes versus high stakes environments. So high stakes is when the student's assignment is really, really important for their future career. So we want to have a rigorous process there. But at the moment, we have the same rigorous process in something which I call the low-stakes assessments with a very small weighting. Whereas I think actually we should start to experiment more in low-stakes or no-stakes formative feedback type of environments to actually build our capabilities as staff and also show students the opportunities that emerging technologies provide. Because a lot of students, as you will think for yourself, live for assessments. They care about assessments more than other forms of learning, so They want to have good marks.
Exactly.
So if we wanted to have really to build our capabilities, we need to experiment more and have in low stakes environments.
I would definitely second that, to say that creating spaces for experimentation, both for staff to explore new things that they can integrate, staff working with students as partners to test out things and figure out how to move forward, is definitely a useful path forward.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Fischer, for inviting me to University of Warwick and giving me the opportunity to see this wonderful institution. And I hope to see you sometime soon and debate about other things related to emerging technologies and AI in education.
Thanks.